Yeah, hello everyone, Nervin Reacts here, and welcome back to another video. So yeah, I know it's been a long time, but like I said before in my post, that I had stuff to work on, stuff to focus on with school, so yeah, I hope you understand. But anyway, we're back now, and so we're gonna be reacting to episode 4 of the Henry Ford series called Ignorant Anarchist. Now in last episode, episode 3, I remember extra history saying that in this episode will be Henry Ford's descent into darkness. So yeah, I wonder what that's all about. Anyway, let's get to it, shall we?
Ford plant, Highland Park, 1913. Henry Ford has just returned from a long trip to Europe, being fawned over by the press for his technical acumen and $5 workday. And on his return, a team of engineers, including his son Edsel, unveil a surprise for him. A new prototype, a lovingly updated Model T with new...
I know this is just a cartoon drawing, and that the real car itself probably looks a lot better. But for a cartoon drawing and representation of a real-life car, this actually looks pretty nice. I wonder how Henry is gonna react to it.
New sleek bodywork. Ford walks around the car, inspecting it. Then he opens the driver's side door as if to get behind the wheel. Instead, he rips it off.
Wait, what?
He then walks to the passenger side and destroys that door too. Then he smashes the windshield, stomps the fenders off, and kicks in both headlights. In shocked silence, the team watches as Henry Ford demolishes their painstakingly crafted gift. Ford is teaching them a lesson. This is his company, and the Model T is his car. A perfect car. And no one, absolutely no one, will take it away from him.
Oh jeez, he's becoming a narcissist. Now in regards to that situation, if I were one of the engineers, including his son, I would have definitely be pissed at it, because, it was our hard work. We spent so much time and money and resources on that. And, yeah, you could easily say, why didn't they stand up to Henry Ford? Well, for one thing, one of the engineers was his own son, and of course, when you're a child, you are taught to not talk back to your parents. So this definitely is hard situation for him. But not only that, it's even harder for the other members of the team, because they're not family members. Henry is not going to give mercy to the other, members of the engineer team. He has the full right and authority to fire them, or lower their pay. So they have no choice but to just take the insults and whatnot. This is a very difficult situation for them.
This series on Henry Ford was chosen by our awesome patrons over on Patreon. And if you want to have a say in the historical time to him, Ford had always had a dual nature. For instance, while he gave his son Edsel every advantage, he was also an overbearing, controlling father. And his famous ability to take on all comers, admired in many instances, also made him hostile, temperamental, and abusive. He also loved...
Now this is not unique to Henry Ford. There have been many people in the past, including today, whether they're businessmen or, politicians and whatnot. It's not unique to Henry. We all have a dark side. People often say, oh, I would never do that. But realistically speaking, if we were put into the right circumstances and conditions, our instincts are gonna, overcome our sense of morality and cause us to do things that we thought we would never be able to do. So we all have a dark side within us.
Loved boyish pranks, but as he grew older, they became more mean-spirited. In fact, at his first factory, he once hooked up a battery to a urinal so it delivered an electric shock when used.
Oh heck no. If I were that employee, I'd try to sue Henry Ford and maybe quit. And sure, the $5, work pay may be nice, but if I had a boss like that, I would definitely quit and find another job. Or better yet, sue him.
Still, employees loved him for his common touch and willingness to pitch in on the factory floor. And despite the sinister undertones of Ford inspecting workers' homes, most employees, even the journalist Ida Tarbell, who you can learn more about in our Teddy the Trustbuster series, praised his social programs. After all, the $5 daily wage changed their lives. In a few years, it raised the average savings of a Ford worker from $200 to $2,000 and
wow, that is a really huge step up.
Made it possible for their children to attend school rather than work themselves. Plus, Ford's minimum wage became the standard in America.
Yeah, we often today take, free and cheap education for granted, but back then, if you were a member of the working class, it was almost impossible to be able to send your children to school and give them an education. If you were a member of the middle class back then, you had a chance to give your children an education. But if you were in the working class, your chances were zero. Or just, very little. So, yeah, the $5 work wage was a huge, revolution and benefit to these workers, despite, Henry Ford's, descent into madness.
American manufacturing, vaulting millions to the middle class. His techniques of mass production, at the time called Fordism, also spread, lowering the cost of manufactured goods. These policies were transformative for the American workers, perhaps even more than the Model T, and Ford was celebrated as a hero for it. But in 1914, a darker side of Ford began to emerge, because he began thinking that he was in fact the lone genius that the press treated him as. Instead of just engineering and business, he assumed he could speak knowledgeably as a master of any topic, from politics to society to war and peace. And he forgot he hadn't done everything himself. Soon, Ford began butting heads with James Couzens, who had for years successfully reined in Ford's worst qualities and channeled his best ones. But in 1913, Ford decided that Couzens would no longer restrain his genius. He publicly contradicted and undermined Couzens in meetings, went around his back, and at one point, when Couzens asked him to sign receipts for borrowing company property, Ford instead burned them. But the break came as a result of World War I. Throughout his life, Ford was an avowed peace activist. He believed war to be wasteful and unproductive. It broke down rather than built up. The war in Europe.
Wow. I honestly thought, with him descending into madness, I thought that he'd be okay with war.
Europe, he said, was nothing to do with America or the average man. Was he right? Well, kinda, but he also called American soldiers lazy and insane, which later say the Lusitania's civilian victims, quote, had been warned, and blamed the war on a shadowy cabal of, quote, bankers and financiers. So, yeah.
Now I don't care about Eden. Come on.
Then in December of 1915, he chartered a ship in a highly naive scheme to send a delegation of peace activists to neutral Norway to negotiate an end to the war. This trip was a disaster, as you can imagine, and Ford abandoned the delegation the moment they made dock. Journalists also found him shockingly ill-informed on the state of current events in the war. The last straw for Couzens was Ford using company letterhead for these activities and trying to publish an anti-war editorial in the Ford Company newspaper. He resigned, later going on to become mayor of Detroit and a longtime U.S. senator. Meanwhile, the Dodge brothers, who were now built...
Good for him. He decided, you know what, I'm not gonna take this anymore, I've had enough. I'm off to do my own thing. Good for him.
Building their own cars, mind you. And Ford's other investors had it with him. He was never supposed to be solely in charge of the company and had clearly shuffled money around to avoid paying investors. Yet it was his plan to divert $55 million of dividend payments to build a giant new plant on the Rouge River that finally pushed things too far. From the Dodge's standpoint, Ford's Model T price cuts, the $5 wage, and his aggressive expansion had come at the cost of the shareholders. They successfully sued him, forcing him to halt construction plans and pay out...
Yeah, as great as this is and beneficial to the workers, the more benefits and, rights you give to your workers, the less profits the higher up and the company are gonna gain. It's sad, but it's true. Which is why many companies today are wishing to, go into automation because they don't want to have to deal with paying actual people, you know? So yeah, it's sad but true.
A $20 million dividend. Ford had enough of being controlled. For decades, he'd been resentful of his investors, men who, from his perspective, contributed nothing but money. So he formulated a plan to cut them out.
Would you why are you angry about that? You need money to keep your business running.
In 1918, he retired, passing the presidency to Edsel, then loudly started talking to the press about forming a new company in competition with the old one. He would make a new car, he told reporters, half the price of the Model T and better engineered. Shareholders panicked, thinking Ford's new venture would put the Ford Motor Company out of business. So when purchasing agents approached them offering a good price for their Ford stock, every single investor sold, thinking the shares could only drop in value. But those agents were secretly buying on behalf of Henry and Edsel. And when the deal
Wow. Cheap move, but smart as well.
closed, the Ford Motor Company was the largest wholly family-owned company in the world, and Ford could now do whatever he wished, including cutting out almost everyone who'd helped him form the company and make the Model T in the first place. By that time, the company was turning out anti-submarine patrol boats and aircraft engines for the war effort. Now, Ford hadn't changed his ideas about the war, but once the US joined, he wasn't going to shirk his patriotic duty. While few of the boats or engines arrived in time for combat, it was still a successful test of American manufacturing's ability to pivot from civilian to defense production. Yet the end of the war brought no relief, for in 1919, Ford experienced the worst courtroom drama of his life. See, he'd sued the Chicago Tribune for libel, after it ran an article calling him an anarchist and ignorant idealist. With the trial hanging on whether those accusations were true, Ford had to personally take the stand to refute both claims. Though it was immediately clear he was no anarchist, the cross-examination exposed how uninformed Ford was on the basic facts of American history and government. On the stand, he said the American Revolution took place in 1812 and identified Benedict Arnold as a famous writer. He denigrated
Wow. I'm not even American, and even I know that's not true.
the idea of studying history altogether, saying he was interested in the future, and that leaders' knowledge of the past hadn't helped prevent the Great War. So, Ford won the case. A measly 6 cents in damages, but the coverage was absolutely brutal. And Ford, who had already cut
He won the battle, but he definitely lost the war.
so many people out of his life, drew further inward and became angrier. And one outlet for that anger was a personal column he had in the Dearborn Independent, a struggling local newspaper that he'd purchased. There, Ford decided his next great social crusade would be against the people he considered responsible for the start of the First World War, as well as everything else he didn't like. And now we've gotten to the part that the foreshadow has been warning us about. In May of 1912, Ford published the first article in a series called The International Jew, the World's Problem. In over 90 articles, based on ideas Ford expressed to the ghostwriter who actually penned them.
Oh yeah. I know about this book. I've seen it online when I saw it was written by Henry Ford. I was curious as to what it was, and the contents were quite interesting. It's not a bad book, but it is very interesting. I highly recommend you give it a read. Now, I don't agree with what the book is about, but you should definitely give it a read. Don't worry, it's only 174 pages. It's a quick read.
The series alleged a vast and improbable conspiracy controlling every aspect of life. According to these articles, Jewish plotters were behind everything from the First World War to the rise of square dancing and jazz music. They were behind U.S. monetary policy and ruined the sport of baseball. Not only did they supposedly control Hollywood, but also bootleg liquor and the Irish Catholic political machine of Tammany Hall. And in one piece, clearly still stinging from his trial, he said they were the reason Benedict Arnold turned traitor. These articles, legitimized by Ford's signature, mind you, were
Wow, he really does not know anything about history at all.
Incredibly dangerous, especially since every Ford dealership had to stock the Independent, giving it a national reach and eventually a circulation of 700,000. And he later published them as a 3-volume book with a slightly tweaked title, The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. Ford eventually withdrew the volumes and shut down the paper in 1927, after being sued for libel by a man targeted in the articles. Ford denied all knowledge of the articles, claiming someone else had written them under his name and apologized. But only after Clara threatened to divorce him, though it was already too late. The first German edition of his book had already come in 1922.
Wait, I want to read it. I want to, try and see if my German pronunciation is still, on fleek.
Too late. The first German...
Der International Jude. 1. The International Jew, Volume 1.
An edition of his book had already come in 1922 and landed in the hands of a young Adolf Hitler, who saw much that he liked in Henry Ford. And as we prepare to dive further into...
Oh yeah, I forgot. Hitler was influenced even more because of Henry Ford. So, in a way, you can also say that it was Henry Ford's fault for the Holocaust. So, yeah.
Ford's darker aspects next week, I can't help but be reminded that we only get to talk about important and nuanced characters in history rife with controversial material like this because our wonderful patrons over on Patreon...
Okay, yep, ad time. So, yeah. A lot of this is really interesting. So, yeah, especially that book. I highly recommend you can give it a read. I know, the topic is controversial, but hey, try it before you deny it, am I right? So, yeah. I don't really have anything else to say, really. So, yeah. If you like this video, please hit that like and subscribe. Check out my Facebook page, link is in the description. So will the link to the original video by Extra History. Go check them out, they make amazing content. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!